Welcome to our new episode of Speak Revenue. Remember, revenue is not a goal, it's a result. But a result of what? In this show, we turn our eyes from the output towards the input. We speak to sales leaders and entrepreneurs about their journeys, so join us on our quest to uncover and learn the root causes of success. Let's unpack what works for them and what didn't. Today with our guest, Jacob Warwick. Jacob, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you in the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, happy to be here speaking with other revenue leaders and entrepreneurs, Steven. Thanks so much.
Let's jump right in. I know you. A lot of people know you, but maybe not everybody. So in really short terms, who is Jacob Warwick? What do you do? And why are you so successful?
I will keep it as brief as possible. I was a sales and marketing executive in Silicon Valley for about a decade. Realized that I had, staked my ladder against the wrong building and started working for myself in my late 20s after climbing up into elevated VP and C-suite roles at tech startups. And basically, a lot of folks came to me and said, "Hey, Jacob, how'd you climb the ladder like that? How did you get these promotions or increase your compensation or your own personal revenue that way?" And that led me down a path of coaching others on that journey to accelerate their careers forward. Took me into negotiation and psychology, which is where my primary focus is today. And I would say that the centerpiece of why I would be considered successful today by many would be by studying psychology and negotiation specifically.
That's super interesting. So maybe for our audience who are mostly exactly that target group, our listeners are VPs, sales leaders, entrepreneurs, people climbing up the ladder. Number one, how do I even get to you?
I guess just anything on LinkedIn. If you're a sales or revenue leader, and people will know how to find me, and they will find me. They'll look up my name on LinkedIn. They'll find me right.
Are you approachable on LinkedIn? Can people just
absolutely
send you connection requests, send you messages?
Yeah, I will ignore most message requests that don't have a personalized title for what it's worth. So if they just said, "Hey, I heard you on a podcast with Steven. I'm open to chatting," I'll connect with everybody there. So I only choose one social platform, which is LinkedIn. I've deleted no Twitter, or I guess X now, no Facebook, no other thing. I only concentrate on LinkedIn. So I'm really easy to get a hold of in that regard. I'm not burnt out.
And I think we all are eventually zeroing in on LinkedIn, and looks like we're leaving other platforms. So once I engage with you, how does such an engagement step me through the process? If I'm a VP sales at a company, I want to work on my career, I want to climb up the ladder really fast, I want to, 3x, 5x, I'm not sure what's possible, my income. How do you help me?
Well, first, Steven, I work with a lot of revenue leaders, and some will have that goal of being a chief revenue officer or perhaps a CEO someday. Being one of those performance-driven CEOs with that sales background tends to do well in the economy we have today. Sometimes I will pick someone apart just to make sure that is the goal that they want and really try to understand why. Oftentimes there are folks that think that they need more money, and sometimes it turns out that they value family and balance more. And so I think the first to start any engagement is to understand if the goalpost is in the right direction. Is that really what you want to achieve and why? And for some folks, it's like, look, I need to make a little bit more money. I'm getting behind on mortgage, or I want to do it just to prove that I can, or to show my kids that the sky's the limit. Or some folks will have this goal in their head, like, hey, I want to have a 7-figure year. I want to have $1 million year just to prove I can. Put that money in savings. Do whatever it is you want to do. So I really like to unpack why it is you're trying to do that. And then I want to understand what elements are missing.
I know that conversation from a different perspective. If you hire young vision salespeople, they all want to become team leader, sales leader, VP sales, head of something. And typically when I ask them why, there is no real answer. And if you ask a couple of times why, it turns out they don't want it. They don't really, or they don't know why they want to become. So how do you do this? I had no tools. I just thought I keep asking why, and maybe eventually they will have no answer. And then I go, duh, told you. Think about it. Let's talk tomorrow. How do you approach this with, say, more reflected, more mature personalities? How do you even get there and uncover why they want to, what the goalpost really is?
What's interesting is that asking why 5 times will typically get you to the bottom of any reason. It's almost obnoxious to approach something with childlike curiosity. I call that drilling down until you hit bedrock. And sometimes it boils down to someone shouting and saying, look, I just want to make more money than my parents. Or I need to prove that I'm successful for one reason or another. So what's interesting is even the most mature audiences in the room will have sometimes similarly deep-seated childhood reasons why they want to make so much money or those types of things. You brought an interesting point that we all want to be leaders and successful because, well, that's what society deems as success in a mostly capitalist economy that we live in. And again, most of my clients tend to be based in the United States, although I have worked in different countries where their drivers will be different. So it's something to be mindful of. And there's something wrong with how we reward leadership in general. And that is people that lead teams make more money in most cases. So when people are financially driven, they think they need to lead to be financially well off. And what's interesting in sales is that if you are just an account executive and you're making it rain and you have a good comp plan, you'll make more than the VP of sales in a lot of cases. It's like there are positions where you don't need to lead to be what we call a bread maker or breadwinner in the family, or a rainmaker, or however you want to call it. What's interesting is we think we need to lead in order to make more money or to be deemed as successful. But once we drill down and realize that sometimes the perception of others is not all that important to us, then we can start to release that feeling and say, hey, maybe I can look for something else in my career or whatever. Now, that's not always the case. Most people say, Jacob, make me more money. And that's it. And that's okay too. But I still try to understand.
It's also a matter of reputation. I think we are not only compensating them financially, but also reputation-wise in the wrong way. There is the manager schedule and there is the maker career. And I don't think that we compensate them financially and reputational enough when you decide to be a maker and not a manager.
Yeah, and that's sometimes, and I'll use not sales in this example, but say like a designer. The best designer in the world might be terrible at leadership, but the only way to make more money in design is typically to become a design manager or a director of design or product design or something like that. And so in order to 3 to 5x their output, which you mentioned earlier, they need to build a team, have almost a downline there, and have subordinates and then manage cross-functionally and up. And all of a sudden, they're looking at themselves and they've gotten away from the thing they love, which might have been art and drawing pictures and coming up with nice design and creating that beautiful user experience. They're so far removed from it that they're no longer happy, but they have the money.
Yes.
And so oftentimes I will meet with executive clients where they've had that crossroad. And they said, I've been building the wrong career and I don't know what to do about it, but now I make so much money I can't go back.
Yeah, it's impossible to go back.
Lifestyle will creep up with it. Right.
Yeah, like everybody has planned out what they're going to do when they are rich, but rich people have never planned out what they're going to do when they are poor.
Right.
Okay, for our listeners that feel that they might be not going that path fast enough, or maybe are unsure where the path is leading them, how do you help them? Once you find out that's the goalpost, how do you help them to get there?
So a lot of this is assessing where some of the gaps are of where they think they need to be. And sometimes it's unpacking the role that, again, they think they want. So let's say you're a VP of sales and you think you want to be a CRO. And you have this often glorified, this is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to feel like. I'm going to get this perception, respect. Some of it could be ego. So part of how I help is just actually laying out what the responsibilities are of that role. And if that sounds like something they're going to love or they're going to hate. And having been in those shoes, I can at least empathize somewhat there. But oftentimes it'll be connecting them with other clients that have done those things. And so creating mentorship and those to say, hey, are you sure this is what you want to do? And it may sound like I'm talking people out of that. But one of the things that I found is when somebody is unsure, but they have the skills, that's when they're most qualified, because they know how difficult the task ahead is. They understand the people problem is difficult to manage. The managing of egos at a C-suite level, the influence that you need to have across each functionality. Because the reality is, if for a CRO to keep their job, they need a damn good marketer too. They need a damn good customer success leader. They need damn good operations happening. They need all these other functions to be in click so that when they're selling something, the experience follows through. The product delivers. All of these things need to be in sync. And so what a lot of folks don't realize is you could be the best damn sales leader, but if you don't expand your scope of influence to marketing and product and engineering and all these other factors, you'll lose your job in 18 months, period. And you'll say, I hit the goals, but you still lost. And so a lot of folks just don't understand the nuances of what it means to lead at that particular level. And that much of it is no longer at your functional level of expertise, but it's all cross-functional and you having to learn and master other elements. And the trickiest piece there and the biggest unknown is what types of people are in the room with you. What types of other personalities and egos and team dynamics do you need to work with? And that's why my career personally started accelerating and my clients' results started accelerating when they started concentrating on psychology and influence and how to communicate. It's like all these soft skills that they talk about. They say you need to have the soft skills, but they don't tell you how to get them, right? You just sometimes figure it out when you're older, right? Now, there are a couple of resources to help you get there faster.
So let me ask you before we get to the next question, did I get that right, that the people who engage with you, you pair them up with mentors, or you offer to pair them up with mentors and provide a peer-to-peer network for them?
Occasionally, yes. I don't particularly sell my network. That's not like a sales process of mine. Say, hey, I'll just introduce you to this VP of sales at Google, right? Now, I have worked with those folks. When it's appropriate and there can be a win-win situation, I make introductions and have a community to support that as well.
Understood. Makes a lot of sense. So how do you teach people those psychology skills? Do you give them a list of books to read?
There are some books that I would recommend. If you're only going to read one, it would be Influenced by Robert Cialdini. That would be a top book.
Yeah.
And then I'd also study negotiation.
Also follow him on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah. If you follow him long enough on LinkedIn, you don't need to read the book.
Is that how it? Yeah, I don't follow him on LinkedIn, but I have the book right in front of me, and there's a lot of highlighted sections there. And then there's some books on negotiation, a little bit less on the newer books. I have this kind of rule that a business book should be written in the 90s or later, like old books. It's typically because they're not trying to sell something. They're not trying to be an influencer. They're just showing data and research and their findings. And so I tend to get more intel out of those types of books. One exception would be Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which I would recommend. That's a newer book. Well, at least probably the last decade or so. It stood the test of time. That's made a large impact as well. But to more specifically answer your question about how do you coach someone through that, part of it is, let's say, Steven, you're telling me about a day that you had at work, let's say last week. And you're telling me about the situation that happened. You may be sharing what you're hearing from other people in conversations here in a board meeting or something. You're explaining all these things that are happening. I can trigger and I can talk about moments of influence that are happening there. Like you'll see these two are connected because they've been reciprocating with one another throughout their career. They've traded jobs, let's say 3 times. You know how there's always somebody that drags you along to another company? Like they have each other's backs. They've built likability. They have credibility with one another. They're triggering these levels of influence. And now you're going up against that. And one thing that you have is that you're not necessarily part of the tribe quite yet, at least not as deep in the tribe as, say, those two might have been, having worked for 10 years together, whatever that is. And so we talk about tricks. And I don't particularly like using the tricks, but let's just say ways to increase your likability and your standing within the tribe much sooner. One of those tips that they talk about, let's say in influence, is giving someone a reputation to withhold. For example, Steven, I appreciate that you've been an advocate for me on this show today. You've made me sound professional. I appreciate that you're advocating for me, and I'd imagine that you'll continue to advocate for me in the future. Now, I have no idea whether you want to be an advocate for me or you like me at all, but I've given you a reputation, a positive one, since you're really good to Jacob. You're really good. And I use your name specifically. Everyone's favorite word is their own name. It's how you draw attention immediately. So I say, Steven, I appreciate you being an advocate. I've given you a good reputation to withhold. right? And now you're more likely, now that I've triggered neurons in your brain to say, okay, I'm an advocate of Jacob, that path has been created just one time in your brain, you are more likely to repeat that path and stay consistent with that reputation because it was positive and made you feel good. And so we can talk through situations where you have an important meeting coming up or an interview. We could take ownership of that through our process to basically, we're doing interview prep or meeting strategy. And we're saying, okay, here's how we use name recognition. Here's when we're going to give credit. Here's how we're going to praise publicly, but discipline privately. That's a radical candor tip, right? And we talk through and we role play these situations. So in its most basic form, I'm a sparring partner for executives. So before they go into a big meeting, they have someone smart to talk to and they get to role play. And we can say, look, Steven, if you say this, you're going to sound like an asshole. If you say it like this, you'll come across as maybe milquetoast or boring. If you say it like this, you'll be assertive, but not overly aggressive. And so even when negotiating, we say, here's the soft way, here's the medium risk way, and here's the high risk way. And we talk through the possible outcomes and what could happen through them. And so at the end of the day, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying, what do you feel confident doing? And then when you go into those meetings with confidence, you tend to perform better too, because that anxiety is lifted. You're grateful for the experience that you're having, all these other factors. You said short answers. That wasn't short.
No, but that was profound. I'm trying to imagine how that works. Is that the way that I have you on speed dial, and whenever I'm having a difficult meeting tomorrow, I just go, Jacob, I know it's 11:30 on a Saturday night, but listen, tomorrow morning, and then you coach me through this?
Yeah, it happens all the time. For example, I have a client who's a Hollywood agent right now, and they were doing a meeting with Chris Hemsworth, the God of Thunder, and it was a big negotiation. And she's like, "Hey, I just need to talk to you about it real quick." Right? And I am on speed dial in that regard. I am an untraditional coach. I don't have hourly retainers. I do success-based pricing only. So I do only value.
That's an interesting business model. Tell us more about this.
Especially in a job transition, I'll charge a percentage of what you make and a percentage of what you will make, but only when you've found success. So we break it up into a deposit, and then when you win the position, only if we hit the desired outcome, do you pay me the rest. And so in that regards, that has transformed my business in a profound way, because whether you're $200 an hour, $500 or $1,000 an hour, you're a lot to someone, right? And sometimes, let's say we're just having a casual chit chat where we're not delivering value. Do you want to feel like this is a client-attorney relationship where you're going, oh, Jacob's got me on the clock. Every 15 minutes is a couple $100. You're not going to want to share information if that's the case. But if we're working towards an outcome, like I don't care. If it takes us 4 hours to get an outcome, we're both rewarded in that way. If it takes us 20 hours or 80 hours or whatever it is, you still get the outcome that you want. And sometimes I need to put in more work, right? And that's okay. But the goalpost is aligned to the goal and the outcome that we're looking for. So we try to do it. We're rewarded to do it as efficiently as possible. And so if accelerating your career is important, we want to be pretty damn efficient. I'm not incentivized as a coach to say, look, I know you want to get promoted in 6 months, right? So but I also want a year's worth of retainer from you. So I'm just going to drip out information a little bit at a time to make sure that I get paid so I can pay my bills. Right? That is not a good use of anybody's time.
It's an interesting way of aligning interest between a coach and their client. And it looks like it's also de-risking the client. Let's talk about this real quick. You're competing against other coaches, I assume. I'm not very familiar with that industry, but who are you competing against?
I reckon you could say there's a competition piece there. Now, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the competition. One, I've felt pretty disrespected by the coaching community just in general, or I have negative thoughts towards it in general, because there's a lot of folks that just say, I couldn't really hack it, so I'm just going to be a coach. Or what happened during COVID, which was, I don't want to go back to work, so I'm just going to be a coach. And then what they do is they'll go to someone like my website, or let's say another coach that's been doing this a long time, and they'll just copy their pricing. And they'll copy the page and the messaging. And for the end user, the actual executive, they don't know if they're dealing with a charlatan or not, right? It's just some people are spinning snake oil.
Maybe we can pack some piece of advice into this. What are the red flags? How do I find out if a coach or an advisor is legit or if it's not?
Well, for me, one of the things that's made it really easy for me is that all of my clients come from referral. So you already have a trusted person that said you should work with Jacob. And so that's actually let me get away with not having a very tight structure or having a crappy website for a while, because your best friend just said, you have to work with him. Whatever he's charging, pay it. It's worth it. Like that overcomes a lot of that. So essentially that would be back channeling, seeing past client recommendations or those things. I specifically am tapping into social proof, and that I have like 85 recommendations on LinkedIn, which is a decent amount. I have 3,500 executive clients in my phone that I can loop you into a text message thread and be like, hey, talk to this guy. Oh, you want to talk to a CRO that's done this before? Here, I'll introduce you to two.
How long have you been doing this? How long did it take you to build a list of 3,500 executives that will speak for you?
So I like the premise of this podcast, in that revenue is the outcome, right? And we want to see what the inputs are. Look, the reality is, Steven, it's a habit that I've had since I was 18 of connect, and LinkedIn came out right at the perfect time. There was I owe my career to LinkedIn and my ability to network with others and connect with others. So I developed that habit from a very, very young age. I also am easily impressed by others' accomplishments. So let's say somebody's been a leader at Google for 10 years. I'm like enamored. I'm like, how the hell did you do that? That seems so hard. And, but I have no problem connecting with them. And so I guess it was just the habit of just like being impressed, wanting to learn from others that have done more in their careers than I have, and just being naturally curious. And then also just not being afraid to reach out. And I think it's probably a little bit more difficult these days as LinkedIn's bombarded with a lot of disingenuous cold outreach, and AI is infiltrating a little bit. And it's like, oh man, it's so noisy. So I think timing was important, the habit that I've had, and then also just really concentrating on the outcomes and the experience for my clients, that I don't sell. I don't have to go sell. Now, naturally, their conversations are sales. One other red flag is that if somebody is pressuring you into a sale sooner than you're ready. So my recommendation is go ahead, talk to other coaches, see how they're different. Go for it. I honestly don't care if you go with another coach. I'm not starving for business. What's more important is that we have a good relationship and understanding. And I don't come across as desperate, because I don't need you, Steven, as a client to pay my mortgage. I'm doing just fine, right? So I want what's best for you so we can have a mutually beneficial outcome. And if anyone is scared, or you could tell a sales rep when they need to get their quota, or they need to do something. They're not listening to the needs of the client. And one of my testaments to success is that I'll work with, let's say, a high profile female executive, and then 18 months later, I'll work with her husband, or I'll work with their partner, or whatever that is. So oftentimes I've worked with father-son duos. I've worked with spouses. So when they're keeping it in the family, and I've worked with husband and wife at the same time, and I'm not cheap, but both of them are paying a decent amount at the same time and working through career challenges together. So those are some things that I think I probably took us off track a little bit.
For somebody who just starts out, let's forget about 2023. It's almost over, just one quarter left. Let's talk about 2024. Say you're just starting out. You've been neglecting your LinkedIn profile, career, network for the last couple of years. Everybody had an account there. Not everybody was using it. Now a lot of people got laid off and realize I should do some networking. How would you recommend to acquire your habit of building real healthy relationships with people on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so first, this is a great question, because everyone kind of screws this up. It's a lot easier to get a warm introduction than it is to go cold. Like we all understand that's true.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
So for example, when I said, when they're connecting with me, say you saw me on Steven's podcast, that will trigger me to say yes. Just that, right? That's enough. Because at least I understand the context. So if we're going to start, I like to start in low risk situations. So low risk situations, while you're fumbling around, that might mean practicing on a friend of yours, maybe not even a professional connection, just a friend, and start practicing your story. Hey, I've been neglecting my career. I don't really know what to do about it. Just opening up to somebody in a low risk situation. That might not be a manager right now, but get comfortable having that conversation. Could be a spouse, could be a brother even, right? And they say, look, I don't even know how to help you, whatever. Fine. Now we go on to someone a little bit more risky, like maybe a past colleague you worked with 4 or 5 years ago. Hey, I was reliving the glory days, missed having missed working with you. I'm at this career crossroads and I'm not really sure what to do. Maybe you're feeling some of that too. Like that's some empathy, right? So we're increasing the risk with people, maybe more professional contacts. Now, what a lot of people screw up, and I really like the premise of this podcast, they focus on the end outcome again. They said, I need the interview. I need the job. I need the raise. I need whatever it is. And they don't look at what causes that, right? So they measure how many interviews did I did, or they measure how many cold outreaches did I do? How many percentage responded back to me? It's like less than 5%, right? So you're going to expect a lot of rejection, but you're measuring the wrong things. My argument is that you need to measure conversations had. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't need to measure interviews. You don't need to measure anything. You don't need to measure network expansion because you only need one person to change your life. And what's helpful, and this is what we do in psychology, but we arm other people in our network to go looking for us too, right? It's a lot easier to find a needle in the haystack when there's a dozen people sifting through it for you, right? So that's like some more advanced networking. But essentially I said, look, I want to have, or I could realistically have 2 new conversations a day. Now, if you look at a less than 5% response, that means I'm going to have to reach out to 40 people cold to try to get 2 people on the phone. That sounds like hell. That's a lot of menial tasks. It sucks. Most people would rather chew glass than do that shit, right? But you probably know enough people that can help you already. You just don't know how to ask them for help. You don't know how to give them a call to action. So the trick is, Steven, if I'm going to talk to you, let's say we have a 30-minute call. The rule of thumb is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So 2/3 of that conversation I should spend talking about you and understanding you, right? If I can help you, better. If I know anybody that can help you, like I'm going to volunteer that. If we go back to influence, we're triggering reciprocity here. I've helped Steven in some way. By joining your podcast, I've helped you in some way. There may be some reciprocity somewhere in the future, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
So that's just natural human brain stuff, right? So we spend 2/3 of the conversation focusing on what Steven wants. Then as I'm talking through, I'm at a career crossroads, there's all these things, and you start to have a little bit of a conversation, and then you say, do you know 2 or 3 other people I can talk to about this? That's it. That's my only ask is, can you send a text to somebody and say, hey, talk to Jacob about this, or talk to Steven about this? And so what happens is we're going to keep asking that same call to action with those people too. And now we're waterfalling because look, I don't know about you, but I don't want to scroll LinkedIn all day and send cold messages and try to figure out what to say. It doesn't come natural to most people. But if I'm saying, who are a handful of folks that I should talk to? That is it's not a big ask of somebody. It's not something they're not going to have to go, oh, I'll let you know. Give me your resume and I'll let you know if I find something. You're not going to find something. I want to talk to people right now because that's the only KPI I'm monitoring. Right? So that's where I would get started. And we can go deeper into that, but we're running the podcast dry here.
That's fantastic advice. And it's close to the advice that I give very early stage entrepreneurs that experiment with cold outreach. I tell them, stop talking to people who don't know you. Your first 5, 10, 50 customers will come from the group of people who know you. You don't need to know them, but they need to know you if you're that early on that you don't have built that reputation. And build from there, because there are only 4 ways of telling people what you do. There are people who know you and people who don't know you. And you can do this one-to-one and one-to-many. And if you're trying to do this one-to-many with people who don't know you, it's like buying billboards. It's not for starters. Start with people who know you and try to do it one-on-one. And then you could try to do it one-on-many, which is, by the way, posting on LinkedIn is people who know me. Why else would I appear in their timeline?
Generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah. I don't need to know them, but they apparently know me or somebody who knows me. So I totally agree. Listen, I'd like to ask you a different question, Jacob. Suppose I would have a time machine that can send a postcard to the 5 years younger Jacob Warwick and transport a message of what not to do. What would you tell the 5 years younger self? What to avoid, what to do differently?
Yeah, this is a great question. And 5 years ago, I started a coaching company, a kind of job search for executives company. We grew to 25 employees and I was the CEO, and we bootstrapped over $1 million in revenue and the first year there. So there was a lot of these big wins and I got caught up in the moment quite a bit. And I stopped listening to my gut and I started listening to people that had been there before and what they would do. and it didn't align with what I valued in my life, and it didn't align with my type of integrity. So for example, when tough times came, they said, oh yeah, just fire everybody, fire half the team, go do that. And I pushed back on that and always felt insecure about what I would be doing. And I realized I grew too fast and like all these other things. And it just started cascading into a bunch of like almost imposter syndrome type feelings. And if I were to write a note to myself, I'd say, just trust your gut. Like when you are like, if you feel like this is not going to be a great relationship, maybe it'll work out. I need the money. Just don't do it. Like trust your gut on these things. It's like, you almost always know, like you can avoid the heartache. Your body's been trained to help you avoid danger naturally. It's just fine-tuned to do that, right? If you go 5 days without eating, you could smell colors, like you are hunting, like you can find food, right? Your body is tuned to do these things. So I would tell myself to listen to my gut, study more psychology, negotiate. And the value-based pricing was the biggest transformation in my business. It went from maybe $250,000 years to $1 million years by shifting to the value and having that confidence in myself and the ability. So
I feel like we should do an extra episode just on value-based pricing. Such an important topic.
Yeah, it's absolutely game changing.
Convince you to come back on my podcast one day and we discuss that. All right, everyone. Yeah, I'll be trying. I'll be digging. Jacob, thank you so much. All right, everyone, that brings us to the end of this episode of Speak Revenue. I want to thank our guest, Jacob Warwick. That was a fantastic episode. For joining us today and sharing his valuable insights. Huge shout out to all our listeners. Your support means the world to us. Please visit our website at speakrevenue.com for a full transcript and additional resources. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you go for your listening needs. It really helps to get the word out. Also follow us on LinkedIn, on Insta, on YouTube, and wherever you can find us. We'll be back soon with another great guest. Until then, stay curious, keep listening, keep learning, and we talk soon.